My son turned me away from the family New Year's Eve gathering. "Look, Dad, you've been really difficult lately. Everyone will have a better time if you're not there," he told me. So I spent that night alone in my house while they celebrated at the lake house without me. But the instant the clock hit midnight and the new year began, a shocking news story about me went live across the country. He called in a panic, his voice trembling. "Dad, what the hell did you do?" By dawn, I had 47 missed calls. If your own family has ever called you too difficult, I understand. You're not alone. Now let me tell you how that night changed everything. The call came on a Tuesday evening just as the rain started. I was in the kitchen reheating leftover salmon when my phone lit up on the counter. Daniel's name glowed on the screen. My son didn't call much anymore. Not since Margaret passed 3 years ago. When he did, it was usually about something practical, never just to talk. I dried my hands and answered. "Daniel." "Hey, Dad." His voice carried that careful tone I had learned to recognize, the one people use when they're about to deliver bad news while pretending everything is normal. "How are you doing?" "Fine. You?" "Good. Busy with year-end stuff." He cleared his throat. "Listen, I wanted to talk to you about New Year's Eve." I turned off the stove. Outside, the rain began tapping steadily against the window. Seattle in December, always raining. "The lake house?" I said. We had been going to the family place in Grand Lake, Colorado for New Year's Eve ever since Daniel was 8. Margaret had started the tradition. "Yeah." A pause followed. "So, Olivia and I have been talking, and we think it might be better if you sit this one out this year." I stood completely still. "Sit it out." "You've been really difficult lately, Dad. At Thanksgiving, you turned the whole conversation into an argument about the podcast idea. And at Olivia's birthday, you made that comment about Ryan's tattoos." "I was having a conversation," I replied quietly. "You asked what I thought. I was just being honest." "That's exactly the issue." Now there was an edge in his voice. "You can't just be supportive. Everything has to be your way, your opinion, your judgment. Everyone feels like they're walking on eggshells around you." My eyes drifted to the photo on the mantel. Margaret and me at that same lake house, snow caught in her dark hair, her mittened hand reaching toward the camera. She would have known exactly what to say. She always did. She would have softened this, found some middle ground, but Margaret wasn't here. "So that's it," I said. 41 years of marriage, 3 kids raised, and I'm not invited to New Year's Eve. "It's not forever, Dad, just this year. Give everyone some space. Maybe you could spend it with Uncle Richard." "Richard, my younger brother in Portland." "I see. We just think—" "I understand, Daniel. I heard you." I ended the call. The screen went dark. The kitchen was silent except for the rain, which had now turned into a full storm. I stood there for a long moment, phone still in my hand, staring at that photo of Margaret. First Margaret, now this. The salmon sat forgotten on the stove. I had lost my appetite anyway. 41 years with the woman I loved. 3 years trying to learn how to live without her. And now my children had decided I was too difficult to include in the tradition she had created. I switched off the kitchen light and walked through the house, past the living room with its carefully arranged decorations, past the guest bedroom that used to be Daniel's, then Olivia's, down the hallway to the basement door. My hand rested on the doorknob. Outside, thunder rolled low over Queen Anne, and the rain pounded harder against the windows. I stood there in the silence, then finally went downstairs. The basement was the only place that still felt like mine. The rest of the house had slowly become Margaret's over the years. Her furniture choices, her systems of organization, her photographs covering every wall. After she died, I kept everything exactly the way she left it, but down here, in this unfinished space with concrete floors and exposed pipes, this was still my territory. I flipped on the overhead lights. My workspace stretched along the far wall, 3 monitors on a salvaged desk, file boxes stacked with labels from my EPA days, notes taped everywhere, the organized chaos of someone trying to solve a problem. I sat down and woke the center monitor. Lines of code filled the screen. Python. I had started learning it back in March, teaching myself from YouTube videos at 68 years old. The kids thought it was hilarious. Daniel had joked about it at Easter. Dad's going through his coding phase. But this wasn't a phase. I could still hear Margaret's voice sometimes, especially down here, where it was quiet. Something she used to say whenever I got lost in technical details. Norman, if you build something, make sure it helps the people who need it most. She had been a nurse for 30 years. She understood what service really meant. The code on my screen represented 9 months of work. 9 months the kids knew nothing about because they had never bothered to ask what I was actually doing down here. It began with a conversation in March at a retirement party for someone from the regional EPA office. Thomas Green had been there. Thomas and I went back decades. We had worked together on water quality monitoring in the 90s. He had started doing consulting work, and we grabbed coffee after the party. You know what the biggest problem in water infrastructure is? He said. Communication. Every city has its own system. Different software, different protocols, different standards. When something goes wrong, information moves too slowly. Contamination warnings get missed. Maintenance issues slip through the cracks. I nodded. I knew that reality all too well. 37 years dealing with exactly that. Someone needs to build a universal platform, Thomas continued. Something that can translate between all these different systems. Real-time data sharing, AI-driven analysis. It could save billions. It could save lives. He said it casually and moved on to other topics, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. I had built something similar once back in the 90s while working on Seattle's light rail expansion, a coordination framework that standardized communication between contractors and agencies. Nothing flashy, but it worked. Eventually, the city moved on and my framework was forgotten. Still, the principles were solid. They just needed to be modernized, turned into algorithms, machine learning, and predictive analytics. And I kept thinking about Flint, Michigan, the water crisis. Thousands of children exposed to lead because systems failed to communicate, because warnings went unheard, because infrastructure was aging and no one had the tools to see the disaster coming. So in March, at 68, I started learning to code. Daniel had asked once during the summer, "What are you even doing down there all the time?" "Working on something," I had replied. He laughed. "At your age, Dad, you're retired. You should be relaxing." He didn't understand. None of them did. The platform on my screen could monitor water systems across multiple cities. It could predict pipe failures before they happened, detect contamination patterns in real time. It could save lives. If it worked, if anyone believed a 69-year-old retired engineer could still build something that mattered. I stared at the interface I had spent 9 months creating. It was real. It functioned. The algorithms worked. The integration protocols were solid. But would anyone else see what I saw? By November, after 8 months of work, I needed a second opinion. I called Thomas. We met at a coffee shop near Pike Place Market on a gray morning. Rain tapped against the windows, and the smell of fresh coffee mixed with the salt air drifting in from the sound. Gregory was already there, sipping an Americano at a corner table. "Norman," he said, standing to shake my hand. "Good to see you. How are you holding up?" He always asked it that way, his coded version of "How are you managing without Margaret?" "I'm all right," I replied, setting my laptop bag down. "Actually, I wanted to show you something. Remember that conversation we had in March about infrastructure communication problems?" "Sure. The coordination nightmare. Different systems that can't talk to each other, right?" I opened my laptop. "I've been working on something." Gregory leaned forward, curious, probably expecting diagrams or a white paper, some typical retirement project. I turned the screen toward him and opened the platform interface. For the next 5 minutes, I walked him through it. How the system integrated data from different municipal water management software, how it translated between formats in real time, how the AI component analyzed patterns and generated predictive alerts for pipe failures, contamination risks, pressure anomalies, and maintenance issues, how it could monitor multiple cities at once and create a network of shared intelligence. Gregory said nothing. He just leaned closer to the screen, his coffee forgotten. I showed him the contamination detection algorithms, the cost projection models, the emergency response protocols, and the dashboard interface that displayed everything a city water team would need at a glance. When I finished, Gregory slowly leaned back and stared at me. Norman, he said carefully, do you understand what this is? I shrugged. A coordination platform, a proof of concept. It still needs real-world testing and refinement. No, he shook his head. This is an infrastructure revolution. This is exactly what every water utility in America needs. This could save cities billions in avoided disasters. This could save lives. It's rough, I said. The interface needs improvement. I'd need access to actual city data to properly calibrate it. Norman, Gregory's hands trembled slightly. You built this yourself? At 69? Learning to code from scratch, mostly YouTube and online courses. The core principles I already knew from my EPA work. I just had to translate them into modern technology. This is billion-dollar territory, Gregory said quietly. This isn't a retirement hobby. This is a company, an industry game-changer. I looked out the window at the rain, Pike Place Market across the street, vendors setting up under cover, the neon sign glowing in the gray light. Margaret had always loved the flower stalls there. I just saw a problem that needed solving, I said. Gregory was already pulling out his phone. I know people, venture capital firms that specialize in civic infrastructure tech. There's one here in Seattle, Cascade Tech Ventures. They're always searching for innovations like this. He looked up. Can I show them this? Make some introductions? I thought about Daniel's joke, Dad's coding phase. I thought about sitting alone in my basement for 9 months while my kids planned New Year's Eve without me. What did I really have to lose? Sure, I said. Why not? Gregory's fingers moved quickly across his phone, typing and forwarding. His expression had shifted from shock to something else. Excitement, purpose. I'm sending this to their director of acquisitions right now, he said. With your permission, I'll include some technical specifications. They're going to want to see this immediately. All right. He looked straight at me. Norman, I'm not exaggerating. This is the real thing. This is going to change your life. I didn't truly believe him. I had spent too many years watching good ideas die in committee meetings, buried under budget cuts, political shifts, or simple bureaucratic inertia. But sitting in that coffee shop, rain streaking the windows, watching Gregory's excitement, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Gregory promised to make some calls. I returned home and kept working, trying not to expect too much. He called back within 3 days, his voice noticeably energized. Norman, they want to meet you tomorrow, if you're available. Cascade Tech Ventures. Their director of acquisitions saw the specs I sent and called me immediately. They want a full demonstration. I sat down at my kitchen table. Tomorrow? I know it's fast, he said. But when they move like this, it means they're serious. Very serious. The next afternoon, I found myself in a conference room on the 20th floor of a building in Pioneer Square, downtown Seattle. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Elliott Bay, ferries cutting through the gray water below. 3 executives sat across from me, composed and attentive. Gregory took the seat beside me, quiet but reassuring. I presented the platform step by step. They asked sharp technical questions. How did the AI handle inconsistent data? Where were the potential failure points? How scalable was the architecture? I answered without hesitation. 37 years at the EPA had taught me not only how to build systems, but how to explain them clearly. I could see they were impressed. They leaned forward, took notes, and exchanged quick glances. And you built this alone? Asked the woman on the left, Laura Bennett, their VP of Technology. At your age? I'm 69, I said. Not dead. She smiled. Fair enough. A week later, they invited me back. Same room, same view of the bay. This time, they skipped the technical probing. They wanted ownership. Not a trial, not a license, an acquisition. They wanted to buy the platform outright, bring me on as chief technical advisor, and build a dedicated engineering team under my direction to accelerate commercial deployment. We believe this could transform municipal water management nationwide, Laura said. Eventually, internationally. We're prepared to make a substantial offer. The number hit like a physical force, $12.3 million as an initial buyout. With performance incentives over 5 years, the total could reach $35 million. I stared out at the Seattle sky, ferries gliding through the mist, trying to process the reality of it. There's one condition, I finally said. They waited. I retain control over charitable applications of the technology. Communities that can't afford commercial rates must still have access. That protection needs to be written into the contract. They exchanged brief looks. Laura nodded. We can include that. It's good optics. It wasn't about optics, but I let it pass. The following week disappeared into negotiations, contract language, timelines, responsibilities. My attorney reviewed every clause. Everything checked out. It was legitimate. It was real. On December 15th, I signed the final papers in that same conference room. My lawyer shook my hand. Gregory clapped my shoulder. Laura smiled and said, "This is only the beginning. We'll announce on January 1st, 1 minute after midnight. A clean start to the year." I nodded. New Year's Eve was 2 weeks away. Walking to my car, I pulled out my phone and stared at two names, Daniel and Olivia. I could have called them, told them their outdated father had just sold a technology platform for $12.3 million. But they had already made it clear how they felt about me, about my work, about my opinions. They had uninvited me from New Year's Eve because I was too difficult to be around. I locked the phone and slipped it back into my pocket. The announcement was scheduled for January 1st. I told no one. I chose silence deliberately. December 31st. The house was too quiet. I woke early, the way I always did these days. The bedroom felt too large for one person. It had felt that way for 3 years, yet I still hadn't moved to the guest room. This had been our room, mine and Margaret's. I made coffee and toast. The kitchen window showed a gray Seattle morning, typical as ever. The house had minimal decorations. A small tree stood in the living room because not having one felt too sad, even though there was no one to see it. For dinner, I kept things simple. Pacific salmon and roasted vegetables. I ate at the kitchen table where Daniel had uninvited me 3 weeks earlier. The salmon was good, though I wasn't particularly hungry. Margaret had loved New Year's Eve. She used to call it the most hopeful night of the year. Fresh starts, clean slates, endless possibilities. We always stayed up for midnight, champagne ready. The first New Year's without her in 2023, I had cried. I couldn't help it. The silence was unbearable. The second year, I made it through. It still hurt, but I survived. Now this, alone again, but this time by my children's choice. By 6, I had the TV on. Times Square coverage, crowds gathering, the host talking about fresh starts with forced enthusiasm. My phone lit up, a text from Helen, an old friend of Margaret's. Saw this on social media, thought you should see. A screenshot, Daniel's post, a photo of the lake house, mountains in the background, Daniel, Olivia, Ryan, Claire, and others all smiling, champagne glasses raised. Caption, ringing in 2025 with the best people. I stared at it for a moment, then set the phone down. They had made their choice. At 11, I opened my laptop. An email from Cascade Tech Ventures. Confirmation that the press release was scheduled. Major outlets, industry publications, all set for automatic distribution at 12:01 a.m. Pacific. I closed the laptop and made myself an old-fashioned. I couldn't do champagne. That had been Margaret's drink. Hours together. I carried the glass to the living room. The TV showed Times Square, the crowd growing larger. On the side table next to my chair sat a photo of Margaret taken at the lake house years ago, snowflakes in her dark hair, that smile that always made everything better. "I miss you," I said softly to the photo. At 11:59, the countdown began, the crowd roaring. 10, 9, 8. I raised my glass toward Margaret's photo. "Happy New Year, Margaret." 3, 2, 1. Midnight. Fireworks exploded on screen. Confetti fell in Times Square. People hugged and cheered on the screen. I took a slow sip of whiskey. The house remained quiet except for the television. I found myself thinking about the lake house, my children there raising their glasses, probably relieved I wasn't present to be difficult. I thought about Margaret and how she would have known exactly what to say in a moment like this. I thought about the platform. 9 months of work. The deal signed 2 weeks earlier. The announcement scheduled for 1 minute from now. My phone rested on the side table, dark and silent. The TV showed celebrations, strangers embracing, the ball settling into place for another year, while the hosts shouted about fresh starts and new beginnings. I sat alone in my chair, watching other people celebrate. The first notification came from the Seattle Times at 12:01 a.m. My phone screen lit up. Breaking news alert. Seattle engineer sells water crisis prevention technology for $12.3 million. Beneath the headline was my name and an old photo from my EPA days, at least 15 years outdated. At 12:02, a CNN notification followed. Former EPA engineer's AI platform acquired. By 12:03, my phone erupted. Emails flooding in, text messages stacking, calls lighting up the screen one after another. I sat in my living room, the TV still showing Times Square celebrations, and watched my phone turn into something almost alive, vibrating, chiming, lighting up without pause. Industry colleagues I hadn't heard from in years. Congratulations, Norman. Incredible work. Well deserved. Gregory's message came in all caps. They published your story everywhere. Congratulations. I turned off the TV. The silence only made the buzzing of the phone louder. 3 hours away at the lake house, I could imagine exactly what was unfolding. The party still going, music, champagne, laughter. Daniel and Olivia celebrating, relieved that the difficult old father wasn't there. Then someone checking their phone, pausing, staring. Wait, Norman Hayes? Isn't that Daniel's father? The phone passed around, everyone checking their screens. The celebration slowing, the same headlines, the same number, $12.3 million. Daniel's face draining of color, hands trembling as he read the article, trying to process it. Olivia leaning over his shoulder, hand covering her mouth. Everyone at that party realizing that the obsolete engineer in the basement, the one they didn't invite, was suddenly the headline. At 12:17 a.m., my phone rang. Daniel's name. I let it ring 3 times before answering. Dad. His voice was shaking, panicked. Dad, what is this? I kept my tone calm. Happy New Year, Daniel. The Seattle Times, CNN. They're saying you sold something. Is this real? It's real. 12.3 million? He could barely get the words out. You? When? How? I've been working, I replied. You assumed I was wasting time in the basement. Silence. In the background, I could hear voices, someone asking what was happening. Dad, we had no idea. No, I said quietly. You didn't. More silence followed. I let it linger. I need to... His voice cracked. I need to call you back. He hung up. At 12:20, Olivia's texts began flooding in. Dad, OMG, we had no idea. Please call me. I'm so sorry. I didn't respond. More calls kept coming. Industry contacts, reporters, even a water utility director from Portland. I answered a few, keeping each conversation brief. Yes, the acquisition was real. Yes, I believed in the platform's potential. No interviews yet. Between 12:30 and 3 a.m., my phone never stopped. Congratulations, questions, interview requests, partnership inquiries, messages from people I had worked with decades ago. Knew you had it in you, Norman. At 3 a.m., I finally powered the phone off. The sudden silence felt profound. I sat in my chair, the house dim except for a single lamp, Margaret's photo still resting on the side table. They're interested now, I murmured to her picture. Outside, the rain had returned. The new year was 3 hours old. At the lake house, Daniel and Olivia wouldn't be sleeping. They would be reading every article, every mention, trying to understand how their obsolete father had built something worth $12.3 million while they were busy excluding him. I didn't sleep, and I suspected they didn't either. Daniel arrived at 6 in the morning. He had driven through the night. I was already awake, dressed, coffee prepared. I hadn't slept, but I had showered and shaved. When the doorbell rang, I was ready. I opened the door. Daniel stood on the porch, looking like he had aged 10 years overnight, eyes red and swollen, still wearing wrinkled party clothes with a jacket thrown on in haste. Dad, his voice broke, please let me in. Let me explain. I stepped aside without speaking. He walked into the kitchen like someone in shock. I poured him coffee, set the mug in front of him, and sat across the table in silence. Dad, I'm so sorry, he said, breaking down. We were wrong. I was wrong about everything. I allowed the silence to stretch, letting him sit with it. Finally I spoke. You uninvited me, your widowed father, from New Year's Eve. I know. It was cruel. I can't believe You can't believe you what? My voice remained steady, controlled. Misjudged me? Underestimated me? Decided I was too inconvenient to include? Everything, he sobbed. I'm sorry. Sorry isn't enough. At 7, Olivia arrived. She must have left right after Daniel, driving separately, also crying, also apologizing. I looked at both of them sitting at my kitchen table, my children. First, your mother died, I said quietly. Then you decided I was too difficult to be around. They looked devastated. Dad, Daniel said softly. The money. The success. We had no idea you were working on something like this. So you keep talking about the money. I opened my laptop on the table and turned the screen toward them. The homepage loaded, Margaret Hayes Memorial Water Safety Foundation. Her photo was there, the one from our anniversary 10 years ago, smiling. Daniel leaned forward, reading, his expression changing. Date established, November 15th, 2024. He looked up. That was 3 weeks before Thanksgiving. Olivia read over his shoulder. Initial endowment. Her voice faded. $8 million. That's almost all of it, Daniel whispered. Your mother always used to say something, I told them. When you build something, make sure it helps the people who need it most. She was a nurse for 30 years. She understood service. I explained the foundation's mission. Free platform access for communities that couldn't afford commercial rates, small cities, underserved regions, places like Flint, Michigan, where children were harmed because systems failed to communicate. You gave away $8 million? Daniel's voice was barely audible. Your mother died of cancer, I said. Children in places like Flint were poisoned by their water. I built something that saves lives. Money is simply a tool to make that possible. Olivia was crying harder now. Dad, this is the kind of work I try to do in social services, helping vulnerable communities. You're doing it on a scale I can't even imagine. I know, I replied. You just never asked what I was working on. Daniel buried his face in his hands. We thought this was about getting rich. No, I said. You thought I was obsolete. There's a difference. I closed the laptop and looked at both of them. Now you know who I am and what I value. I don't need your approval. I don't need you to include me. But if we're going to rebuild anything, it starts with respect. Not for what I achieved, but for who I've always been. I pulled a folder from the counter and showed them information about relocating to Portland, maybe near my brother Andrew. Starting over somewhere, my children hadn't already decided I was a burden. Dad, no, Daniel said, panic rising. Please give us a chance to fix this. Time, I answered. That's what I need, and proof through actions, not words, not guilt, and not because I made money, because you genuinely want me in your lives. I made no promises. Neither did they. They simply nodded, accepting what they had done. They left at 8 am. I had a board meeting at 9 am. January turned into February. I focused on work. Cascade Tech gave me an office in their downtown Seattle building, 20th floor view of the Sound, and a team of 12 engineers, most of them young enough to be my grandchildren. They were intelligent, curious, and respectful. They asked thoughtful questions and actually listened to the answers. For the first time in years, I felt alive and purposeful. Each morning, I woke up with somewhere to be, something to build, and people who genuinely valued what I knew. Daniel reached out again in late January. A professional email landed in my inbox asking if I'd be willing to review a marketing proposal. I almost deleted it, but something made me open the attachment. The work inside wasn't casual, it was thorough, real research. Market segmentation focused on municipal water utilities, pilot city selection based on aging infrastructure and budget limitations, and detailed case studies from similar technology rollouts. This wasn't just an idea on paper, it was a structured plan. I agreed to a 30-minute meeting in March, but the conversation stretched into 2 full hours. Ethan listened carefully, took notes, and asked thoughtful follow-up questions. He never mentioned New Year's Eve, the lake house, or anything personal. He kept it strictly professional. By May, we were working together on expanding into the residential market. Ethan proved to be dependable, consistent, and respectful. Around the same time, Olivia approached me separately with a different focus. She wanted the platform to prioritize vulnerable communities, environmental fairness, and the idea that technology should serve people first, not just profit. I told her to bring me a proposal. When she did, it was impressive. Clear frameworks, advisory board structures, and measurable impact metrics. It was strong, genuinely strong. She then asked if she could chair the advisory board if I allowed it. I told her to prove the model worked first, and she did. By summer, both Ethan and Olivia had quietly become part of the Cascade ecosystem, Ethan leading marketing strategy and Olivia directing social impact initiatives. Small changes began to accumulate. Ethan actually listened during meetings instead of waiting for his turn to speak. Olivia asked meaningful questions about water chemistry and infrastructure risks. Neither of them pushed for emotional reconciliation. They simply showed up, did the work, and respected my boundaries. In August, the foundation deployed its first system in a small town in Michigan with a population of 8,000, about 20 miles from Flint. Their infrastructure was just as old and their budget equally limited. The platform detected elevated lead levels in one residential sector. It was an early warning. The city responded immediately, replacing pipes before any children were exposed, before it became a crisis, before it became another Flint. I drove there myself and met the mayor. She looked to be around 40, and when she shook my hand, she cried. She said we had protected their children, that they had watched what happened in Flint, and feared the same fate. I thought about Margaret and her belief that what we build should always help those who need it most. That moment meant more than any financial milestone ever could. Daniel called me in September and said they were genuinely trying. I told him I knew, but when he asked if I was ready to forgive them, I admitted I wasn't sure yet. By November, the platform had expanded into 15 cities. Ethan's marketing strategy had been instrumental, and Olivia's impact framework was already being adopted as an industry model. The team invited me to a celebration dinner where both of them would be present. I declined politely, though I thanked them for including me. Progress was happening, but I wanted it to remain steady and measured. In early December, Ethan called with a careful tone and told me they were planning New Year's Eve at the lake house again. He said he and Olivia would truly like me to come if I was willing. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I drove to Grand Lake on December 30th. The drive from Seattle took 2 days, and I welcomed the solitude. I needed time to think, to decide if I was emotionally ready. When I arrived late in the afternoon, the house looked unchanged. The same log exterior, the steep roof, the mountains behind it. But something in the atmosphere felt different. Ethan and Olivia were already on the porch when I pulled up. They walked down the steps together, visibly nervous. Ethan thanked me for coming, and this time it sounded sincere, not rehearsed. That New Year's Eve felt quieter than the year before. No large party, just family. Ryan and Laura were there, along with a few of Ethan's colleagues, maybe 10 people in total. For the first time, the conversations naturally included me. They asked about the foundation, the Michigan project, and the expansion plans. They didn't interrupt. They listened. Ethan discussed residential market strategy and actually asked for my opinion. Olivia showed me the latest impact report, explaining that 3 additional cities had approved foundation deployment, all communities that otherwise could not afford the technology. I observed them carefully and could see the change. It wasn't perfect, but it was genuine. Around 10, Ethan asked if we could step outside. The deck overlooked the frozen lake, and the air was cold and clear under a sky filled with sharp stars. He told me he would never forgive himself for the previous year, not just for uninviting me, but for years of not listening or truly seeing me, especially after Margaret passed away. His voice broke as he spoke, and he said his apology wasn't about the platform or the foundation. He said that even if I had never built anything, he should have still been there for me. I looked out at the frozen lake and told him that yes, he should have been. The silence that followed was heavy, but honest. Then I added that he was here now, and that mattered. When he asked if it was enough, I told him I didn't know yet, but it was a beginning. At 11:45, everyone gathered inside. Champagne was poured, the first time I had touched a glass since Margaret's passing. Olivia raised a toast to new beginnings, and to finally listening to a father who never stopped building, even when others stopped paying attention. Her eyes were wet, and so were Ethan's. When midnight arrived, we counted down together. As the new year began, they hugged me gently, respectfully. I allowed it, briefly. Not a declaration that everything was healed, but not a rejection either. Later, I watched them clean up and occasionally glance over to make sure I still felt included. Their smiles were small, but sincere. That night, I realized something important. I wasn't invisible anymore. Later in the guest room, I stood by the window looking at the lake, the mountains, and the night sky. At 69, I was still learning that forgiveness is not a single moment, but a gradual process, a slow thaw of the heart. The next morning, I had a foundation board call scheduled, with 3 more cities approved for deployment. Margaret's legacy continued to grow, protecting children and ensuring safe water. That was what truly mattered, the work and its impact. Yet standing in that same house where I once felt excluded, now included through effort rather than obligation, I understood something deeper. Age does not limit what we can build. 69 was not an ending. It was another beginning. Looking back now, I see how close I came to letting pride and pain cost me my family. I nearly walked away believing that being proven right was enough. But time and patience revealed their genuine effort to change. If someone is facing a similar situation, I would say this: demand respect, set boundaries, but do not permanently close the door to reconciliation. Forgiveness is a journey, not a single decision. That lesson ultimately saved my family. Today, the foundation continues to expand, now serving 15 cities and protecting countless lives through safer water systems. But what matters even more is that Ethan calls every Sunday, and Olivia visits regularly with the children. We are building something together again, not just professionally, but as a family that is finally learning how to listen. These grandparent stories are not only about success or vindication, they are about second chances, growth, and the realization that at any age we can still build, still evolve, and still matter. Now at 70, I even teach my grandchildren how to code. They laugh about it, but they pay attention. And perhaps in the end, that quiet willingness to listen is the greatest success of all.